I'm working with researchers from Harvard and stuff, and they give me access to Soros's network. That's Soros's giving network of 7 years ago. Of course, it's all changed and expanded since then, but can you see the complexity of the spider's web that goes along? He's just one of the funders of the anarchy. This isn't an accidental thing going on because America needs a revival. This is an intentional thing that is happening because powerful donors are funding the realignment of America through taking over the political and the academic and the media and entertainment enterprises in order to transform America by discipling the country. We were called to disciple, but we never had a theology for it. We just thought we preach, we have churches, that's it. Never occurred to us that actually discipling a nation means you have to leave the church now and then and actually go down the street to the school system. You got to go to the government. You actually have to go to the entertainment field. You have to go to media. You might even want to show up in corporate America now and then where they're funding these things. So here's what happened. The left built the most powerful coalition in history. How do they do it? After the losses that they experienced in 2000. It was a gathering of Podesta, Harold Ikes, Rob Stein. You won't see this even in the Colorado Blueprint. This precedes the blueprint. Sid Blumenthal and others came to develop a strategy, came together to develop a strategy that would fill in the voids in the leftist movement. And they called the group Thunder Road. So here's what they basically did. You're familiar with how Nehemiah operates, right? So what they did was they took a look at the structure of the conservative and evangelical alliance. Came together, by the way, with Ronald Reagan and kind of waltzed a little bit after that. But what happens is they took a look at all of the Family Research Council. They look at the churches. They looked at Rush Limbaugh and Fox News. And what they do is they created this awareness of these are the engines or mechanisms that unify conservatives and evangelicals around what they think. And then what they did was they said, what would have to exist for us to be able to hit them in the areas where they are vulnerable and counter their influences? So they came up with an ingenious plan. And the plan that they came up with was that they would form a think tank. And they would form a media mechanism, and they would form a technology, social media mechanism. They would create a get out the vote mechanism. In other words, they were ingenious at building entities that could compete with what they perceived to be the strengths of our movement. What they didn't know was we were never unified in the first place. They thought we were. We never were. And actually now, we have to get unified. So what takes place over the next 10 years? They built the most powerful political coalition in history. How? Because they had centralized funding. And this is how we did this exercise here in the auditorium. If you want to get Code Pink, which is a LGBT movement thing, and working with the Black Panthers, and you want to get an environmental group, and you want to get La Rosa, which is the immigration group, these are all funded evangelistic organizations. You see, you think that a 501c3, a 501c4, and a 520, these corporations, we always think of them as being missions and church things. The left actually has these organizations set up so they can fund them as single-issue evangelism groups. So they're out there working to evangelize 24 hours a day. Do you understand how that works? So they have these groups that are out there working, but how do you get them all to work together? If Ferguson is on fire, how are you going to get Code Pink and the gay organizations to work with the Black Panthers? They have nothing in common. I'll tell you how you do it. If somebody's writing the checks to both organizations, they both show up. Centralized giving. This was the ingenious thing they did. They figured if they can fund the organizations and put a blue check mark next to their name, if you want to keep getting funded, you better cooperate. So they cooperate. Did you know that was happening? This is how it works. This right now is the present iteration of what Democracy Alliance looks like. This is like, look, they have the legal teams, they get out the vote teams. They're very highly organized. And these are all, by the way, 527s, 501c3s, 501c4s that are being funded by a group of like 200 to 300 super wealthy, mega rich multimillionaires who are obligated to put like at least $200,000 each into various organizations and pay $30,000 a year dues. And they do that. But you don't have to look at the national plan. You can just take a look at how this worked in Colorado. 4 wealthy progressives replicated the Democratic Party and funded their own version. In other words, what happened was a thing called McCain-Feingold. There was something that happened with campaign finance reform, which basically took the funding out of the parties, which opened Pandora's box, because now creative, wealthy people could create their own entities to fund directly, and the party no longer had control. So that opened the door for someone to create competition for the Democratic Party. The parties don't control themselves. The Republican Party doesn't exist. Did you know that? There's an RNC, but it doesn't exist. There's no statewide organizations to speak of, except in a couple of states. The Democratic Party really doesn't exist. It exists as a concept. But you know what controls the Democratic Party? It's the organizations and the donors that are the muscle behind the party right now. That's how come the whole party lurched to the left. All right, watch how this works. They created their own version of the Democratic Party in Colorado and funded it themselves. And they built a mechanism for policy generation, coalition building, leadership recruiting, and grassroots activism. The Gang of Four, as they're called, the four super uber wealthy people that got everybody playing on the same page, funded dozens of 501c3s, 501c4s. Every church is a 501c3. They have a bunch of them even that are activist organizations, shockingly enough, 501c4s and 527 organizations that work in perfect harmony to take down the Republican establishment and install left-leaning policymakers in its place. They created the siege engines. It's like a counterfeit apostolic strategy. If you're going to disciple a state, what are you going to do? You're going to get the wealthy people to fund it, then you're going to have a strategy that's going to create entities that are issue disciplined for certain areas that you're going to penetrate the opposition and wear them down through. Remember what Wilberforce said, who overturned slavery in Great Britain as a Christian? He said, here is the secret to winning the great battles. You must engage a sustained pattern of public persuasion. Remember those words, sustained pattern of public persuasion. The great problem we have in America is we have tremendous public persuasion with Christians among Christians, but nobody's talking about political issues. And the people that need to hear those political issues aren't hearing an articulate, anointed voice, because conservatives, for the most part, are actually more intelligent and more thoughtful on what they do than the left. The left is more emotional. The problem is decisions are made largely by packaging an argument sometimes with emotion is more powerful than argument with logic. So we've got all these really smart people that aren't persuasive and all these dangerous people who are. That's why we need to unleash the church. They built a robust network of nonprofit entities to replace the Colorado Democratic Party with names like, and I love these names because they sound so wholesome. They're so American Pie. They sound like the names that are in the hallway out there. Alliance for Colorado Families. They were going to target seats in the House. Forward Colorado, targeting the Senate. And then they had two field operations for the House and the Senate to get out the vote. Coalition for a Better Colorado. If you get a phone call from someone on your neighbors saying, hi, I'm calling for Coalition for a Better Colorado, of course you got to pick up. You're not going to hear, hi, I'm calling for a coalition for destroying America with the Antichrist spirit. Hello. So through this powerful, and I even get into the depth of this thing, but it's centralized giving. That's a powerful thing. Man, if we could only get Christians that have the money to be able to be more coordinated and working with a centralized strategy instead of funding their favorite nonprofit organization. Listen, I get funded myself, but I'm telling all of them, I said, you guys got to work with a coordinated strategy because the people you're funding aren't necessarily working together. And what's weird is the left that doesn't like each other work in unity, and the right who loves each other don't work together.